Welcome to the Rethink Desi Reframe Series, where we challenge conventional narratives about social change, sustainability, and the South Asian community. Join me, your host, Arpita Sharma, each week as I have candid conversations with thought leaders, social entrepreneurs, researchers, activists, and creatives as we uncover the strategies, innovations, and stories behind their efforts to reshape our society. Today, we're joined by Charvi Budhdeo. I'm really excited for this episode because I have wanted to interview someone who does expressive arts therapy for a long time. And Charvi is a distinguished expressive arts therapist. She holds a master's degree with honors in expressive arts therapy and a minor in psychology from the European Graduate School in Switzerland. She brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to her sessions, and her educational journey is enriched by diverse specializations, including arts-informed ecotherapy from Swahana's Expressive Arts India, dance movement therapy from TISS Mumbai, and contemporary arts and mixed media from Atakarali Center of Movement Arts in Bangalore. So currently advancing her skills in internal family systems under tutelage of Dr. David Stern, Charvi has amassed over 1,400 hours of therapeutic practice, touching lives across a broad spectrum of settings. Her work spans educational institutions like the Symbiosis Institute of Design and the School of Communications and corporates such as Book My Show and Maybelline, leading medical establishments including Kokaleben Hospital and Tata Memorial Hospital, and impactful NGOs like Cry and Make-A-Wish. So with a dedicated online practice, she offers expressive arts therapy sessions to private clients and communities, both online and in person. So it's really wonderful to have you here with us today. And I'd love to start us off by asking, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming an expressive arts therapist and founding the movement spectrum?
That began about 6 years ago, actually. It started with my training in dance movement therapy. And right after is when I thought that I need to just name my practice something, and that's where the movement spectrum came in. I've often been told by a lot of the people in my life that my life and the person that I am is almost synonymous to movement. And there's always been its spectrum blends with some other questions that you might have for me. But in terms of what brought me to dance movement therapy to begin with was, I think I have always said this to my mom, whom I'm very close to, that my way of learning and being the person that I am since a very young age has been through dance. When she put me in dance class when I was 5 years old, I was training in a classical dance form called Odissi. And at that point, I had a very love-hate relationship with something that was sort of put on me because it was my mom's dream to become a dancer, and she didn't get to do that. And so when she had a child, she was like, you know what, I'm just going to live through her and make my dreams get realized through my daughter. But I was actually much more interested in other forms of dance when I was younger, and the classical art form just felt very restrictive, and there was a lot of discipline. There was also a lot demanded from the students. Long story short, I think it was when I became a teenager is when I stopped dancing to concentrate on my education, because in the Indian culture, it was still sort of looked down upon that how could you be dancing? You have to ace your studies. And so I think it was in my 9th grade and 10th grade that I gave up dancing for the first time in my life ever. And that didn't work well. I started eating out of stress. I almost felt like I didn't know how to be in this world. It was very disorienting for a very young child. And I saw a performance of a friend who was performing her big, sort of debut performance as a performer that, it's called a Mancha Pravesh, which is like a graduation sort of a thing that, I've become a dancer today. So it was that really big performance, and I was in the audience. And at the end of the dance, I just had tears flowing through my eyes because I didn't realize how much I missed training and being in dance and what it meant to me. And I think it was that day that I realized that dance was never just about performance or about the center, the light or being in the limelight for me. It was just so much more than that. It's where I felt belonged. It's where when I would be sick, I would still end up going to dance class, and I'd feel better. I would not obviously be dancing as much as energetically as I would when I was okay. But it just something about being in that environment and being immersed in dance was healing for me. And of course, I didn't have the words for it then, but I remember coming back after that performance and looking at my mom as a very young teenager, um, and telling my mom that, man, I wish I could share this, what dance does to me, with our family. And then maybe they'd understand why this means so much to me and why education in the sense that we've been told is not working. I don't understand words. I can't sit and read. I mean, it takes me a lot of time to read the same section that someone would to understand it. But if you teach it to me through dance, and suddenly it all makes sense for me. And that's, I think, something that I didn't have the vocabulary then, and I ended up going to do fashion because at that point I was like, oh, I gotta make money, and I was always creative, so fashion was really booming in India at that point. And I went and trained myself in fashion as an undergraduate degree, which I do not regret. I think it has given me so much. But it was in the third year that I think I realized that this is not for me, because I started working in internships at that point, and the world of fashion at that point in India was extremely toxic. People were not treated with respect. It was not nice. And I started to realize that I'm not sure that the person that I'm becoming wants to be this consumeristic, because we'd end up, styling such big labels. But it didn't make sense for me to spend so much money on one piece of clothing anymore, especially for the person that I was becoming at that point. And that's when a couple of my friends looked at me and went like, have you ever seen your eyes when you speak about movement? And that's when this idea that I'm synonymous to movement started to like seep in, because up until now it was always something that was extracurricular, right? Like, you have to make money, and how can you ever think about movement in any sense in the Indian context? And so I did start to think about it. And when I was researching, I stumbled upon dance movement therapy. And when I read about dance movement therapy, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been saying to my mom, but I just didn't have these words to describe it in this way. But it makes so much sense. So it was a very gut feeling. Like right after my graduation, I was like, I've got to do this. It also meant that I had to be a little smart about how I was going to pitch it to my business-oriented Indian family. So I didn't tell my entire plan until I actually just got into the college, and then I was like, this is what I want to do. Of course, there was a lot of friction, but I'm so glad that for whatever reason, I flowed into this practice. Like, it felt like it was calling to me, and I sort of just went with my gut and just leaped into this. I did not know that it would take me here. I did not know what I was doing at that point. I just knew it felt right. And I think it came with a certain privilege as well, because it meant that I would take the support of my family a lot longer than people in their early 20s would. And that meant that there was a lot of guilt with that as well. But when I sat with it, I was like, hey, I think I'm just walking on a path that not too many people have before. And if I have the privilege to do that, and if I know that I'm going to make the most of it, I think it's worth the shot, and I think it's worth the risk. So that's where that began.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like your love of dancing really has taken you a long way in life and really influenced you to go down this route, which is so interesting. And I'm so excited to learn more about it. So I guess what I want to ask is, so you shared a little bit about this dance portion, but what really inspired you to pursue this career in art therapy and then combine it with this dance movement therapy and then this new thing that you're learning called integrated family systems?
Yeah. That's a really nice question. Okay, I think I've been pondering about this myself as well. I think because my entryway was movement, but it was after I did my dance movement therapy training, I was the year after that, I was working on field a lot. This was pre-COVID. This was I was 23, And I was out in the field working with the most vulnerable audiences ever. So I was working with cancer patients across hospitals in Mumbai. I was working in women from lower income areas. So was visiting a lot of slums located in various areas in Mumbai. I was working with children with special needs. I was working with grandparents that were an average age of 85 to 90 that had severe Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Then I was working with children from rural Maharashtra. So I would travel into rural Maharashtra, take an overnight train and step into village settings and do the work, do dance movement therapy. And I started to realize when I started to work in all these diverse audiences and also sensitive audiences, that movement can be really daunting for a lot of us, especially given how education kind of shapes our thinking towards creativity, any form of creativity, but particularly with dancing, it has a lot of beauty standards attached to it. So there's a lot of, I started seeing a lot of people feeling very self-conscious of even diving into movement that was not choreographic, that was just in the sense of letting loose and finding that a movement that is authentic, because it was so jammed into their heads that we must look good when we're dancing, that it almost felt like when they were doing it this way, I started to feel resistance amongst the audiences. And that's when I realized that I think that the other art forms need to come into my practice, because I feel like when the other art forms come in, they become supportive tools. And perhaps that could help the body and the kinesthetic to then access movement within. So that was, again, it was just something that was a felt sense when I was in field, that I started to realize that I need more tools in my bag to be able to reach different types of audiences. And that's where it is essentially began. But also that ever since I was a young child, my mom is a visual artist. So she is a commercial artist. And my dad is a gifted musician, although he never did pursue music because business became his one goal in life. But I hear stories about how my grandfather would get music instruments for my dad, and in a time where there was no YouTube, no Google, my dad would sit with that instrument and crack it without any formal training. So he does have an innate sense of musicality and understanding of music. So ever since I was young, I've been exposed to different kinds of music that my dad would bring for us at home, and we'd listen to. So I started to look back and went like, really, all forms of creativity have been a part of my life, my upbringing. And although I might have chosen movement as my place of home, all these other modalities have sort of impacted me as a person as well. And that's when I started kind of looking back at how meaningful my life is with these art forms as well, these other art forms. And then again, it was, I think, the leap into expressive arts therapy. And I think when I stepped into an expressive arts therapy setting for the first time, I still remember distinctively, we were in a small town called Oroville in India. It's beautiful, it's lush, and it's in the middle of a forest. It's stunning, and what a place to be and to study a thing like expressive arts therapy. And that's where I met my mentor, Gopika Dhanuka, who's the founder of Swahansa. And that's where my idea of also pursuing a master's became a lot more serious, because I was looking at doing a master's anyway. But I was just confused about what it should be and what that modality should be. But when I stepped into expressive arts therapy for the first time, I just remember feeling like, oh my God, I'm home. This is my language. This is what I've been speaking about. I felt belonged instantly. It was really magical. And I think I fell in love with the practice. And then this was 2019. And I started my master's journey technically in 2019, but it got a little derailed because of COVID, of course. And then I just graduated last year. But it's been an honor to be submerged in the arts in this way. Yeah. So that's about expressive arts therapy. And I think in terms of how internal family systems came into my life was, I grew up in a joint family. So even in the context of urban Mumbai, that's very, very rare. So we are 10 people. Like I grew up with 10 people in a family. And I got very interested in systems and how that affects development, growing community, how people come together. And that also became my research ground of my thesis in expressive arts therapy during my master's. And I got really intrigued by how a system has its own intelligence and how it can come together. And there are parts that starts to sort of form patterns, and they start to kind of integrate themselves. And there's just magic that gets created. And this all happened when I was on a car ride in Mumbai, and I saw like a bunch of birds flying, and I was like, how do they even know how to fly in this particular formation? They seem so in rhythm. And then I started to think about this reel that I'd watched about starlings and how starlings form these really beautiful patterns. And I was like, how is it that the birds have this wisdom? So I think it started with the question how. And then I started researching, and I was also doing community work at that point with expressive arts therapy. And I started to see a lot of synergies between what was happening with the arts in a room and when people come together, and the system thinking way of being in the world. That's how internal family systems essentially happen, because I was like, if it's happening externally, it's possible that it's happening internally as well. And when we look at the physical body is comprised of various systems that are sophisticatedly designed, right? Like, so we have the intestines, we have the breath that's doing its work. So we have all these systems that are making a human physical body function beautifully. What makes us think that the inner world, which is our emotional and mental world, is not comprised of systems also? And there has been a long run in the West where the mind and the brain has been viewed as a singular, entity, whereas a lot of other cultures do refer as the mind and the spirit as multiple. And internal family systems actually brings that in, the multiplicity of the self. So I think each started to just come in at the same time, like at the right time, at the right time for me, when I was starting to develop these questions and curiosity towards these different things. And I have literally just trusted my gut and just gone like, this is the right move for me. And that's exactly how all these three things happened in my life. Yeah.
Are you ready to rethink what it means to be Desi? Follow Rethink Desi on Instagram for inspiring stories, cultural insights, and a community that celebrates every facet of South Asian identity. And don't forget to follow Charvi for her unique take on art, dance, and therapy at Charvi B, that's CHARVIB, on Instagram. Join the movement, follow Rethink Desi and Charvi today. Yeah, that's so wonderful, dear. So I've been following you for a while. I just really love the content that you do that utilizes different tools to really explain concepts, because it's often, I think a lot of these concepts are really complicated and use, really artistic tools in order to be able to express them and share them in a simple manner, which makes them so easy to understand. And I follow your story. So I've seen kind of your dance performances and movement work as well. So it's so helpful to kind of hear the backstory of how all of these pieces have formed for you. And I would love to ask, because you did do your studies in Switzerland. And so how do you think about incorporating elements of Indian culture and heritage into your expressive art practice?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very, very important question that I'm dealing with currently as well. Since a lot of my training has been in classical Indian and folk dances of India, there is this question that arises that how can these two sort of pathways merge, and where can there be intersections? I don't think I've fully explored it just yet. It's still it's a question that I'm still sitting with. But there's definitely this idea of decolonizing. Expressive arts therapy currently is very Eurocentric. But now that there are various cultures that are coming in and doing the masters with the people that essentially coined the term expressive arts therapy. Now, this is the first generation of people that ever started expressive arts therapy. There has been a lot of conversations about how can different cultures bring in their own flavors. And so when I went to Switzerland for my master's, we were about 36 countries that were there. And it was a rich bed of cultures that came from various corners of the world and how the arts and creativity have impacted them in their respective cultures. And I remember a couple of them from looking at, we were two Indians that were graduating last year and we were giving our exam presentations. And a couple of them from across the world looked at us and went like, it seems that if you've got to really immerse yourself in creativity and in art forms and in movement, then you've got to be in India. And I was like, yes. And I forget how rich the Indian culture is. Like, it's incredible the things that we get to see in a span of like this entire country, and how varied and diverse our clothing, our food, and we know this, but when it's looked from an external gaze, there's a deep sense of reverence for what I had when I was growing up in this country. So there's definitely this idea of how can we start decolonizing something. And I think as peers, me and my colleague, and now we have more people that are doing the masters, that this is a question that we sit with. We still haven't really, none of us have still really figured out what that could look like in our practices. But I'm hoping that the more time we spend with this question, the more we're going to arrive at something that feels true to us. In the masters, in my thesis, although there was this sense of, so when I spoke about community work and systems, I was looking at a lot of cultural Indian contexts like Garba, like these folk dances that happen in Gujarat. And a lot of the text that I was viewing on the internet was surprisingly done by the West researchers about Indian folk dances like Garba, which is a community form. And I remember feeling angry about it, that where are my texts? Where are the people from, that have been researching this in our country? And so there was this need to reach out to people that are dancers in the country and see if they have text available. And most of the text was in regional languages, which I needed to then translate. And I was like, I'm okay to do this work, but I'd rather quote people that are scholars of this field and that are in the context of India, rather than having someone from the West trying to understand Garba. And not that I'm taking away anything from the research that they must have done, but there was just this sense of, no, I need to hear and represent voices of my culture. And although it was a little difficult, I did try to do that. And I think a lot of us now from India are doing that with the masters. I have another colleague that's now writing her thesis, and she's doing similar things with Navras, and how the 9 emotions that is written in the Natya Shastra, which is the book of theatre and dance in India from millennia before, speaks about these 9 emotions. And can those 9 emotions be templates for our work in therapy? And how can that influence our work in therapy? So I'm interested in her thesis as well, and it should be done in the next 2 months. But yeah, I think now we're beginning to sort of sit with this question and act upon it a little.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear. I think it's sometimes hard to remember when you're living your normal life just how long colonization has influenced, Indian culture, South Asian culture, and really we're in that first phase of unlearning and undoing a lot of the trauma and those experiences, really starting to visit this idea of Indian culture from our own perspectives, our own lenses, and start to reshape and retell the stories in a way that actually represents ourselves and our own experiences. So, and I'm sure that really does require a lot of therapy. So I'm glad you're there.
It's so important that you say that, Arpita, because it's true. I do think that a lot of the way that I am approaching therapy is very Western, and the idea that our culture can be blended, I sense resistance within me. I sense this sense of, oh, but like how, and how is that ever going to happen? But to that part, I have to kind of say that I think we're forgetting the wisdom that each of these cultures have. And I get that it has been diluted over the years, and some things have been taken out of context in a lot of cultures. I get that, but I think if we get to the crux, the texts that really sort of capture the essence of these cultures, we might arrive at something that could be remarkable. There are already people on the internet as well that are speaking, the Indian therapists that are speaking about how can Indian culture, from shamans to mystics, what is it that they bring in and what's their place in the world of therapy today. So there is a lot of discourse that's already happening with this. And I think, yeah, I'm excited, and I'm excited to see what we can do as a culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. Therapy is an extremely powerful tool to really help people to reclaim their lives and sometimes really undo a lot of the pain and the trauma that they feel and allow them finally come into the present moment. And so it's just powerful that you're sharing that. Um, so I'd love to get into this question of what are some of the common misconceptions about expressive arts therapy that you've encountered during your practice and when you go out and talk to clients, and how do you address them with your clients?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, thanks to our education system, is we get graded in our education system on how good we make art or how good we dance. And I think that has impacted how people think about art forms generally. Of course, there are skill-based training, and of course, there are people that are doing this professionally and are interested in kind of gaining a lot more skill when we speak about visual art or writing or theater or dance, any of those art forms. But that doesn't mean that the general public that does not want to pursue this professionally or does not want to get into the skill-based does not have access to these art forms. So that's the misconception, that if we're not doing this in a skill-based setting, then why must we even, right? Like, if I'm not going to be good at it, why should I even do this? So that's the biggest thing. And this idea that we need to be good at art forms, I think, needs to be deconstructed a little bit. And I get that it can take time, but that's one of the first things I do in my discovery calls with clients, that you don't need any prior experience in any of these art forms. That could have never lifted a crayon in your life, and you could still access this. And the reason that you can still access this is because creating is really an innate ability that humans possess. When we the first instinct that we have as a child is that we make sounds and we babble. Before we even have language, we babble and make sounds. Before we can write, we start scribbling. Where the walls and everything becomes a canvas, and we just take and we start scribbling. Expression and creativity is really a part of our DNA. We create on a daily basis. If I say that's hard to imagine, think about it. Are you not creating spaces? So the place that you live in, you're creating that. You're creating relationships. So the act of creation is really a part of being human. And that's what we're tapping into when we speak about expressive arts therapy and using creativity as a tool for therapy. So that's the first misconception that a lot of people have. And I think the second thing that I see a lot also is India is just finally opening up to the idea that therapy can be okay. Even within the urban context, right? Like, it's just starting to warm up to this. Yes, that I may need help. I don't need to be crazy to seek help. And these are just words that are thrown here in the context of India, that, oh, you must have to be crazy to want to seek therapy. So it's so like permeated into the culture that this idea of therapy is taboo, that it's just now starting to warm up, I think, because of social media, that, okay, anybody could need help. And I think it's not an act of weakness, but more an act of strength. And that started to now shift a little bit in the urban Indian context. But I also see a lot of people look at me with such puzzled looks when I say that I use creativity for therapy. And they go like, what do you mean? So am I going to come to your session and like create art, like an art class? And because, like I said, I think just art being skill based is so ingrained that the idea that art can be used outside of the context of skill is defumbles most of them. Like, it feels like, yeah, how can you? So I think I've just started to simplify my language really easily, where I just go like, imagine in talk therapy, you use talk as a medium of expression, whereas in expressive arts therapy, you use talk as well as art forms as a medium of expression. So it could look like a 3-year-old has made it, as far as it makes sense to you, and it kind of is an expression of how you are feeling or the challenge in your life. it's okay, because it doesn't matter. We don't want to become Picassos, or we don't want to become good dancers in this space. We actually just want to access the strength of these art forms to be able to help ourselves. So I've started to really simplify language and meet them where they are at to be able to make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I'm hearing from you is that it seems like a lot of these clients face trouble around kind of this idea of this perfectionism, right? Where they're looking for external validation from someone when they're doing any type of creative practice, for someone to really validate their item that they've created or the dance performance that they've created. And so part of this process is also about unlearning this external validation portion and learning how to internally validate using these tools.
Yeah, you're so right. Actually, I'm just going to add on to that, Arpita, because a part of my practice is individual sessions with clients that come on with specific concerns, and another part of my practice is doing corporate workshops. And it's in these corporate spaces that, oh my God, this practice does wonders. Like, I do 1.5 hour sessions on an average with corporates. And these are people that go to office 9 to 5. A lot of them haven't been as in touch with their creative selves, in general. And one of the first feedbacks I get from the corporate world is that, oh my God, I forgot how fun it can be to just create something without the pressure of being good at it. And I don't remember the last time I did something because I wanted to do something, not because I was looking for someone else to comment on it or give me validation. And that gives them such a sense of liberation. And that's their first point of, oh my God, like this I didn't expect. And that's what the practice does in general.
That's so great to hear. And I could imagine in many workspaces around the world the need for this type of openness with experimentation and openness to creativity. So I want to ask you a little bit about this idea of incorporating or approaching cultural sensitivity and awareness when working with clients from diverse backgrounds. And you're currently in India, but even within India, right? There's so many diverse to the table. So there's multiple languages, multiple religions, and a spectrum of class, gender. So how do you really think about cultural sensitivity in this context?
Yeah, Arpita, you're so right. I think within the Indian context, there's so much that's happening, and I don't want to get very political, so I'm going to try and stay off the politics of what's happening in the country. But I do get a lot of clients from various religious backgrounds. And I think for me, as a therapist, my first job is to be unbiased, and to bring that unbiased sensitivity. I have to stay very grounded in the fact that everything that's happening in the country in terms of that is dictated by by religious aspects is sort of, how do I say it, is repressing the humanness of our experience. So what it does is, because your religion becomes more important than, my religion is better than yours, or yours isn't as important. Within that, there's been such a dehumanization of the human at the other end, that I see this on a daily basis. Even within the conversations that happen in the extended family or the family, with the discourse that I'm sometimes a part of, in terms of what's happening with Gaza and the thing. So I feel like at this point, a lot of what's happening in the world also starts to seep in to our contexts, and to bring in sensitivity to all these to these different experiences hasn't been all that hard for me, because I find myself unbiased often in terms of because for me as a therapist, I think the human at the other end is most important. I'm not religious myself. I don't subscribe to any of the religious contexts in my community, because I do think that religion has been taken out of context. I also have read deeply about religion and about the texts that come with religion, and I do think that it's been misinterpreted in most cases, and a lot that I'm seeing around me also. So I think just being grounded in the fact that each of their experiences and what they come with is so valid, and to just validate that within myself first and then to my clients when I meet them is has been the most important practice for me. Not forget as a therapist, just as a human in this world. And I think that's what brings in a lot of sensitivity in my sessions as well. There's a lot of othering in India. There's a lot of othering, whether it's in terms of what gender you identify as, what religion you are from. There's just constant othering. And I think a lot of the othering brings people to therapy as well. So just bringing in that sort of knowledge and sensitivity that right now the atmosphere in India does feel dehumanizing on a lot of scale and a lot of contexts. And yeah, just staying with that sort of knowledge and being grounded in the humanness of people.
There's a value to also just kind of sharing that struggle, and I feel it too. I think that in a larger context, right, like these struggles specifically around religion, around gender, around class in the United States, around race, ethnicity, is, they really do impact and shape our experiences in so many ways. And so it's important to learn how to do that, and it can also be really challenging to walk into that space and figure how to do it in a way that can open people up and allow them to feel comfortable in a space. Yeah. So I want to ask, because you're a therapist, and what role do you feel like expressive arts therapy plays in promoting mental health and well-being within the Indian context?
I am a very firm believer that expressive arts therapy has a very, like, it almost feels like the piece of puzzle that's missing in the mental health context in India, specifically in India. We forget that culturally, everything that we do is celebrated through the arts. So whether it's religious ceremonies, whether it's ceremonies where we are bringing two people together and celebrating their love, or whether it's ceremonies around life and death as well. There's so many rituals and so many things that we do on a daily basis that involves the arts. It's unreal, from rangolis on our doorsteps, to painting faces, to having elaborate costumes for certain things. All of this is so a part of our culture that I think because of colonization and everything that has happened in history to us, we've sort of forgotten our roots and forgotten how embedded the arts have been in our lives, and in our history and in our cultures and in our tribes and literally everywhere in India. I almost feel like it's feeling like a cycle, and we began at a certain point. We went into a lot of colonization, and now we're sort of finding our roots back and finding our way back into what really is the essence of the Indian culture. And I think now that that's happening, expressive arts therapy essentially just fits the puzzle right in, and it offers the people of India the option of choosing creativity as a modality of expression, healing, everything that we've done in the past before. Folk dances, communal dances in India was a form of healing. That's how people came together. That's how people felt connected in our tribes. So we're really just going back to the essence of who we are as a culture. And I think expressive arts therapy, along with many other modalities, plays a really important role in sort of taking us back towards where we came from. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think even in the context, I think a lot of the value of having cultural arts programming or any sort of creative expression can be so healing for those who have suffered really traumatic past experiences, whether in childhood or in adulthood. So it's really wonderful to see how that can play a role in therapy as well. So I'd love to jump in a little bit to, how do you stay connected with the latest developments and practices in this field of expressive arts therapy? Because it seems like a fairly kind of new area, and you are kind of, on the forefront of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. Um, uh, it does feel that expressive arts therapy is sort of emerging very strongly right now. There are a lot of research papers that have been written on a daily basis. I'm subscribed to a lot of the channels and journals that sort of write these papers. So I stay informed in terms of that, and in terms of reading papers that are written by my professors or peers or people that I might have known or heard of in the field. And that's one. So constantly reading about what's happening in the field. Secondly, I think is because where I did my master's from is a global network. We ourselves have our groups, and we are connected in a way where we get daily updates from what's happening from across the globe in Canada or from Brazil. So there's a lot of intercultural exchange that's happening within our peers as well. So and some of my peers are doing amazing work. Like, I'm in awe of the kind of work that they can do. There's someone that I know that is working in the Amazonian forest with expressive arts therapy. So it's really, really, it's incredible. So I think those become another medium of me being updated with what are the possibilities with expressive arts therapy, and how brave and how many change makers am I surrounded with. And so that's the second. And the third, I think, is for all of us as expressive arts therapists practice is to be embedded in the art forms ourselves. And that's why we are constantly learning about the practice in a felt sense. So the more immersed I am in creative practices in my own way and use them, not again to become great at it or to become, but I'm using it as a tool in my life. And the more I sort of open my doorways to different, which is why I think you might have seen me doing a lot of origami. I haven't done origami before. This is very new for me. But because it's so new for me, it also does something. I feel challenged, and I feel like I'm understanding the arts in a new way because this is a new modality. It did feel at one point movement became very comfortable for me, and to expose myself to these different art forms, it helps me understand the value of the practice of expressive arts therapy. So everything that I read in textbooks suddenly now starts to happen in my life, and so to practically feel it and in the body is where I'm constantly gaining my expertise and really embodying the practice of expressive arts therapy. So I think those are three ways. I think one of the first essential things is to just be immersed in the arts as an expressive arts therapist, because there's constantly something that the arts are teaching us.
Yeah, that's really wonderful, and it inspires me. I really want to go and do more art after listening to you. What advice would you give to aspiring expressive art therapy practitioners, especially from the South Asian community?
Yeah. Again, I don't know if you're in terms of expressive arts therapy that are budding and just doing their just starting their journey on this. It depends on what context they are. I think if they're abroad and not in India, there are still some opportunities in terms of what you can do after you've done your studies. Whereas in India, nobody's hiring us. So the first kind of advice that I give people that also reach out to me on inbox, on DM, is to be like, if you're choosing this, you're also choosing then to be a marketer. You're choosing to pave your own way. You're choosing to make space for yourself, because currently there's no space in the Indian context. So a lot of the things that I do, including social media, as well as free talks that I give in clubs around, or just make pitch presentations to corporates, sometimes not knowing that this is probably not going to translate into work, is to just put myself out there and speak about the work that I do. Because the next time, and this is something that I truly believe in, then when India feels ready to take this on, the first thought is going to go like, oh, I remember that girl that had come to give me that pitch presentation that spoke about the power of arts and the corporate culture. Maybe we can contact her. So what you're really just doing is you're just putting yourself out there. Some translate into projects, some don't, and that's fine. It's relentless. There are days when I remember waking up and going like, what have I done? I could have just done fashion and I would have been okay, because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make space for myself. I don't know how to be self-motivated every day and to just to do what the things that I need to do. So I think what really helped me was the faith in the practice, because I have unmovable faith in expressive arts therapy. And second, that if I have to make this work, I have to be loud about what I'm doing. I have to tell it to people that I meet. It's just something that I have to be relentless with. So there were times when I initially began, when I had no work. I remember sitting and on a Monday and kind of looking at email addresses that I could find of HR from in LinkedIn or from other places, sometimes even mental health practices in India. And I would have a list of 10 of each. So 10 corporates, 10 mental health institutions, 10 health hospitals, 10 schools. And my job was for that week to draft emails and send to them. None of them would reply. That's fine. But I've got to do what I've got to do and what I can control. So I think one of the things that I tell young, aspiring expressive arts therapists is first that it's going to be hard to make money and it's going to take some time to get the money in. And secondly, nobody's hiring you in the Indian context. So find space for yourself, advocate, talk about it. The more of us do it, the more we're going to do service to our world and to our field and to our profession. And so I also work from the mentality of abundance, where I don't feel that we guard things and keep that, because there's so few of expressive arts therapy, I'm not going to share my projects or I'm not going to share my resources. But instead, the more we share and the more we kind of speak about the work that we're doing, the more we're kind of bringing in the rippling effect of how much this work can spread and create awareness. So working from a space of abundance as well, that collaborate with people, shadow with people, speak to them, annoy people, I think yes. But that would be my advice with young expressive arts therapists. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I think that's really important in the context of when you're thinking about Western economies versus like Indian economy, it's really hard for a lot of these new work to be able to come into formation. And when you're struggling with those resources, there's a lot of work to be done. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for tuning in to the Reframe series. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay connected with us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Rethink Desi for the latest updates. And if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, become a sponsor, or join the Rethink Desi directory, visit rethinkdesi.org and fill out our form. We look forward to hearing from you. So I'm excited to give you an exclusive sneak peek into our upcoming episode of the Reframe series. I did a little bit of digging through your LinkedIn, and I found it really interesting that your journey actually started from environmental engineering, and then it transitioned to data science and urban planning, which is really quite intriguing to me. And I'd love to know what were some of the pivotal moments or experiences that led you to transition between these two fields?
It has been kind of a focus area for me to develop the career like that. Initially, to take you from the very start, I think I was working as an environmental engineer when I was working at Vedanta. It was a power and manufacturing industry. And so I was in the private space working for an industry. And I could see the technical know-hows. I could understand the technical know-hows, but to be able to have an impact on the social level, say the city level, was something that was missing. And so I went on ahead with, starting an Instagram account, making an education kind of a perspective and education level via Instagram or via other means. But that was not enough. So I was looking at other things, and this intrigued me, the overall environmental cause. And I thought on just an engineering level, we are making an impact by, reducing the pollution that industries create, managing them so that they are within limits. But in the Indian perspective, it has its limits. And I really wanted to go forward with something like city level, planning level thing, so that we can actually impact the lives of people and actually be actually be able to say things on bigger issues like urbanization, sustainable development overall. And to do that, I thought taking an education in urban planning in the US, where people have actually seen these kind of things, people know these difficulties more, these know-hows, and then they are ahead of the curve, and then they can give better learnings to us. So that was something that was in my mind, and so I moved to taking an education in the US at Cornell University. And I did my master's in city and regional planning. And there I finally understood the know-hows of city planning, the know-hows of urban planning, and how looking at things not just from an urban or environmental perspective was required, but also when you think about social lenses, when you think about a city, those things come into a lot of importance, that just looking at, say, an environmental conservation scheme and thinking, oh, yes, reducing pollution is not the only thing that is required. Reading a lot of reports from the UN and others, it was something like we need to have a perspective, a holistic perspective, where we are not just looking at environmental, but we're also looking at the social lens. We are also looking at the economic perspective of, these solutions, and tying it all together to be able to see and to be able to show um, the impact that sustainable development can create. And that all of it tied together was my journey. But at the very end, I somehow got into data analytics because that was the part where, in my education at Cornell, urban planning becomes a little bit abstract, where we are going into the gray area. We are talking about things, but we're not having concrete solutions, or we're not even able to show the problems as such. We show pictures, we show videos, and we know the problems via books, via education. But to showcase that problems to the layman person is something that is not easy. And I thought data analytics, spatial analytics was something that really helped me with it, to be able to say the stories via data, via analytics. And then I thought that, yes, this is something that I need to go forward with. I need to have this skill set. And this is something that puts across all the problems, all my stories in a very clear manner. Data is not biased. Data is not having, say, the author's perspective so much, but data is having the viewer's perspective more, because whatever you're looking at is the actual data, and you can see, oh, that is the problem thing, that is the solution, what can be the right thing to do. So that was my whole journey, how I came from a environmental background to going into urban planning, and finally here working with urban analytics to solve complex urban problems.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And also coming from a data analytics background myself, it's really, I can say that it can be really powerful when you ask the right types of questions with data, right? You're able to open up new perspectives, be able to look at things in a different way that might be able to help people and create innovation in spaces where there hasn't been any. So I'd love to know, in your role at Plan RVA, you leverage this data analytics to address complex urban planning challenges. Can you walk us through maybe a project where data science significantly influenced the decision-making process or outcomes?
Right. So data actually comes into a lot of different projects now. We have a dedicated team here at Plan RVA, which is completely called the data team, data and analytics team. And so to take you through a project, I will, before that, tell you about lots of different projects which go into that project, which finally, creates the decision-making step for us. So there are projects like the long-range transportation plan, where we actually look at, say, how the development will be in 2050, say 20, 30 years down the line. And that is able to, advise us or guide us over guiding plans to, say, go forward in a certain manner so that we are able to see and forecast and not get, just shocked by things that are happening, but are able to be going in a certain way which is streamlined. So that was the long range transportation plan. There is another project called the regional indicators that kind of gives us an overview of what the reality is. We develop indicators using census data and other sources to kind of create indicators on education, health, economic, workforce, and transportation to kind of show us what the reality is like for our region and where there are, opportunities for development, opportunities for growth, opportunities for social equity.